What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest stars walks onto a morning show set and everything goes completely off the rails? When a simple interview turns into a full-blown confrontation that nobody saw coming? Well, that's exactly what happened when John Travolta sat down with George Stephanopoulos on Good Morning America, and what unfolded was nothing short of explosive. Before we get into this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling me what you think about celebrity interviews going wrong, because trust me, you're going to want to be part of this conversation. The studio lights were bright as always, the cameras were rolling, and the audience was settling in for what they thought would be another standard celebrity interview. John Travolta had been making the rounds promoting his latest project, and Good Morning America was supposed to be just another stop on the press tour. George Stephanopoulos, known for his hard-hitting journalism background, was set to conduct what the producers billed as an intimate conversation about Travolta's career, his return to the screen, and his legacy in Hollywood. But from the moment Travolta sat down, something felt different. There was a tension in the air that even the viewers at home could sense. George opened with what seemed like a straightforward question. "John, welcome back to Good Morning America. It's been a while since we've had you here. Your new film is getting a lot of attention, but I want to start by asking you about something that's been circulating in the press lately. There have been several reports about your involvement in the production, specifically some conflicts with the director. Can you address those rumors?" Travolta's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He shifted in his seat, clearly not expecting the interview to start there. "George, I came here to talk about the film, the story we're telling, and the incredible cast I got to work with. I didn't come here to address tabloid gossip." George leaned forward slightly, his journalist instincts kicking in. "But these aren't just tabloid rumors, John. Multiple crew members have gone on record saying there were significant disagreements on set. As someone who's been in this industry for decades, don't you think the public deserves to know the truth about what really happened?" The atmosphere in the studio shifted. You could feel it. Travolta's jaw tightened, and his publicist, sitting just off camera, visibly tensed up. This wasn't going according to plan. "The truth?" Travolta repeated, his voice taking on an edge. "The truth is that making movies is complicated. It's collaborative. Sometimes people have different visions, and yeah, sometimes there are disagreements. But that's part of the creative process. What I don't appreciate is coming on your show, a show I've been on multiple times over the years, and being ambushed with this kind of question right out of the gate." George didn't back down. "I don't think it's an ambush to ask about something that's been widely reported, John. This is journalism. This is what we do. We ask questions that people want answers to." "Journalism," Travolta said, almost laughing but without any humor in it. "Is that what we're calling this? Because it feels more like you're trying to create a moment here, George. You're trying to get me to say something controversial so you can have your viral clip for social media." The audience was completely silent now. This had gone from a standard morning show interview to something entirely different in a matter of minutes. George's expression remained professional, but there was a flash of something in his eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged like this on his own show. "John, I've been doing this for a long time," George said, his voice measured. "I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, and yes, plenty of actors. I ask tough questions because that's my job. If you're not prepared to answer them, then maybe you should reconsider doing interviews." That was the line that changed everything. Travolta sat up straighter, and the friendly Hollywood smile was completely gone now. "Reconsider doing interviews? George, let me tell you something. I've been nothing but gracious to this show, to you, to everyone here. I've given you ratings, I've given you moments, and this is how you treat me? By starting off with gotcha questions designed to make me look bad?" George held up his hand, trying to regain control of the situation. "Nobody's trying to make you look bad. I'm simply asking you to respond to legitimate reports about your behavior on set. If they're false, say they're false. If there's context we're missing, provide it. But don't sit here and act like I'm the villain for doing my job." "Your job," Travolta shot back, his voice rising slightly. "Your job used to be about finding truth, about real journalism. Now it's about generating clicks and controversy. You want to talk about my behavior? Let's talk about the behavior of journalists who take anonymous sources and turn them into headlines without ever verifying the facts. Let's talk about how you guys destroy careers and reputations based on half-truths and outright lies. The producers in the control room were in a panic. This was live television, and it was spiraling. But they couldn't cut to commercial, not yet, not in the middle of this. America was watching two heavyweight personalities go head-to-head, and neither one was willing to back down. George's composure was cracking just slightly. "John, I have to push back on that. Every story we report goes through rigorous fact-checking. We don't just throw things out there without verification." "Really?" Travolta challenged. "Because I have receipts, George. I have emails. I have text messages. I have witnesses who will contradict everything that's been reported about that production. But nobody called me before running those stories. Nobody asked for my side. They just published and moved on to the next controversy." George tried to steer things back. "Okay, so you're saying the reports are false. That's fine. That's your statement. Let's move on to—" But Travolta wasn't done. "No, we're not moving on. You started this, so let's finish it." The tension in the studio was absolutely thick now. George Stephanopoulos looked directly into the camera for a brief moment, then back at Travolta, clearly trying to decide how to handle this situation. He was a seasoned professional, someone who had navigated countless difficult interviews, but this was different. This was personal now, and it was happening in front of millions of viewers. "John, I understand you're frustrated," George began, his tone slightly more conciliatory but still firm. "But you have to understand that we report on what sources tell us. If there are inaccuracies, we're happy to correct them. But you can't expect us to not report on stories just because you don't like them." Travolta leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving George's face. "That's the problem right there. You hide behind sources, anonymous sources, people who have axes to grind, and you give them a platform to spread whatever narrative they want. And when it turns out to be wrong, when it damages someone's reputation, you just issue a quiet correction that nobody sees and move on to the next victim." "That's not fair," George interjected. "We take corrections seriously. We have standards." "Standards," Travolta repeated, shaking his head. "George, I've been in this business for over 4 decades. I've seen how this works. I've watched journalists, people I respected, turn into entertainment reporters chasing ratings. And you know what's sad? You used to be better than this. You used to be about real news, real issues. Now you're sitting here grilling me about alleged drama on a movie set, instead of asking me about the actual work, the actual story we're trying to tell." George's expression hardened. "You don't get to come on my show and lecture me about journalism. I've earned my place here. I've covered wars, elections, constitutional crises. I think I know a little bit about what constitutes real news." "Then act like it," Travolta fired back immediately. "Stop treating celebrity interviews like opportunities to create scandal. Stop letting your producers bait guests with controversial questions just so you can get your moment. You're better than this, or at least you used to be." The crew members were exchanging glances. Some were fascinated, others were horrified. This was unprecedented. George took a deep breath, clearly trying to maintain his professionalism, but you could see the frustration building in his face. "Let me ask you something, John," George said, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "Is this about the questions I'm asking, or is this about the fact that you don't want to answer them? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're deflecting. You're attacking me instead of addressing the actual issues." Travolta laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "There it is. When you can't defend your tactics, you turn it around on the guest. Classic move, George. Really classic. But I'm not deflecting anything. I'm telling you directly that your premise is flawed, that your sources are unreliable, and that you're more interested in conflict than truth." "My sources are unreliable?" George challenged. "These are people who worked on your film, John. They were there. They saw what happened. Were they?" Travolta shot back. "Because I was there too, George. Every single day. And I'm telling you that what's been reported is not what happened. But apparently my word, my first-hand account, means less to you than some anonymous crew member who might have an agenda or might be making things up for their 15 minutes of fame. George shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to concede ground. So everyone else is lying except you? That's what you're saying? I'm saying that context matters, Travolta responded, his voice intense. I'm saying that creative differences are normal and don't constitute the kind of drama you guys are trying to sell. I'm saying that maybe, just maybe, the media has become so obsessed with controversy that they'll turn a normal day on set into a tabloid headline. There was a moment of silence. The camera operators didn't know where to focus. Should they stay on the two-shot, capturing both men's faces? Should they go tight on George? On Travolta? The director in the control room was making rapid decisions, cutting between angles, trying to capture every moment of this unfolding drama. George decided to change tactics. All right, let's talk about something else then. Your career has had incredible highs, but also some significant lows. There were years where you couldn't get work, where people in Hollywood had written you off. How does that experience inform how you approach criticism now? Does it make you more sensitive to negative press? Travolta's eyes narrowed. Oh, so now we're going for the personal angle? We're going to talk about my struggles, my failures? George, you really don't quit, do you? It's a legitimate question about your career trajectory, George defended. You've been open about those struggles in the past. When I chose to be open about them, Travolta emphasized, when I decided to share those stories on my terms. There's a difference between voluntarily discussing your journey and having someone weaponize your past against you in an interview. George leaned forward. I'm not weaponizing anything. I'm asking you about your experience, about how it shapes your perspective. That's what interviews are supposed to be about, understanding the person across from me. No, George, Travolta said firmly. What you're doing is trying to paint a picture. You're trying to suggest that I'm defensive because I've been down before, that I'm oversensitive because I've faced rejection. That's not journalism. That's psychology, and you're not qualified to analyze me. The audience was completely transfixed. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others couldn't look away. This was raw, unfiltered, and completely unpredictable. George's co-hosts, who would normally chime in to lighten the mood or redirect the conversation, remained silent. This was George's interview, and he had to navigate it. I think you're reading too much into my questions, George said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Am I? Travolta asked. Or am I finally calling out what everyone in Hollywood knows but is too afraid to say? That entertainment journalism has become a game, and the rules are designed to make the journalists win and the subjects lose. You ask loaded questions, you create false narratives, and when we push back, you act like we're being difficult. George's patience was clearly wearing thin. John, if you feel that way about interviews, why do you keep doing them? Why are you here right now? That question hung in the air like a challenge. Travolta stared at George for a long moment, and you could see him processing, deciding how far he was willing to take this. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter but somehow more intense. You want to know why I'm here? Because I believe in the work. I believe in the film we made, and I believe the people involved in it deserve to have their story told properly. I'm here because I made a commitment, and unlike some people, I honor my commitments even when things get uncomfortable. George didn't miss the implication. Are you suggesting I don't honor my commitments? I'm suggesting that somewhere along the way you forgot what the commitment was supposed to be, Travolta said. The commitment to truth, to fairness, to actually listening to people instead of just waiting for your turn to ask the next gotcha question. That's not what I do, George said, his voice rising slightly for the first time. I listen to every guest who sits in that chair. I give them the opportunity to tell their story. But I also have a responsibility to ask the tough questions, to hold people accountable. Accountable for what? Travolta demanded. For making a movie? For having creative discussions with a director? For being a human being who doesn't always get along perfectly with everyone? George, you're not interviewing a politician who misused public funds. You're not exposing corruption or wrongdoing. You're trying to create drama where there isn't any. George's jaw clenched. I'm trying to get honest answers. And frankly, John, you've been dodging questions since you sat down. If everything is so simple, if there's no story here, just answer directly. Were there conflicts on set or not? Travolta threw his hands up. Of course there were conflicts. Show me a movie set where everyone agrees on everything all the time, and I'll show you a boring, mediocre film. Conflict is part of the creative process. It's how you push each other, how you make something better. But what you're trying to do is take normal creative tension and turn it into some kind of scandal. And I'm not going to play that game. So you admit there were problems? George pounced. No, Travolta said firmly, pointing at George. See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You just did it right there. I said there were creative discussions, creative conflicts, which is completely normal, and you immediately tried to reframe it as admitting there were problems. That's manipulation, George. That's twisting words. The producers were sending frantic messages to George's earpiece, but he seemed to have stopped listening to them. This had become something more than just an interview gone wrong. It had become a battle of wills, a clash between two men who were both used to being in control. I'm not twisting anything, George insisted. I'm trying to understand what actually happened. You say one thing, the reports say another. Someone isn't being truthful. Travolta leaned forward, his voice intense. Or maybe, just maybe, the reports are incomplete. Maybe they're taken out of context. Maybe your sources had their own reasons for painting things a certain way. Did you ever consider that? Did you ever think that maybe the narrative you've been fed is designed to serve someone else's agenda? Whose agenda? George asked. Who benefits from making you look bad? I don't know, George, Travolta said with exasperation. Maybe someone who wanted a bigger role and didn't get it. Maybe someone who felt slighted by a creative decision. Maybe someone who just wanted their moment in the spotlight by spreading gossip to the press. The point is, you didn't bother to find out. You just ran with the story because it was juicy. George's face was flushed now. We verified our information. We spoke to multiple sources. We did our due diligence. Multiple sources who all might have been coordinating their stories, Travolta countered. Multiple sources who might have been part of the same clique on set. Did you talk to the director? Did you talk to the producers? Did you talk to the majority of the cast and crew who would tell you a completely different story? There was a pause. George's expression suggested that maybe they hadn't done all of that. Travolta saw it and pressed forward. That's what I thought, Travolta said. You got some salacious quotes from a few disgruntled people, and you ran with it because it fit the narrative you wanted to tell. John Travolta, difficult star, causing problems on set. It's an easy story to sell, isn't it? That's not fair, George said, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. Fair? Travolta's voice cracked with emotion now. You want to talk about fair? I've given decades to this industry. I've worked with hundreds of people, and the vast majority of them would tell you I'm professional, dedicated, and collaborative. But those voices don't make it into your story, do they? Because John Travolta is a decent guy who works hard, doesn't get clicks. The studio had gone completely silent. Even the crew members who had been moving around earlier had stopped. Everyone was watching this unfold, sensing that something significant was happening, that this was more than just two people arguing. This was a moment that was revealing something deeper about the relationship between celebrities and media, about truth and narrative, about power and accountability. George tried to regain his footing. John, I hear what you're saying, but you have to understand the position we're in. We report on the entertainment industry. When we get information from credible sources about conflicts on major productions, that's news. That's what people want to know about. Credible sources, Travolta repeated slowly. George, a credible source isn't just someone who tells you something that sounds interesting. A credible source is someone whose information can be verified, whose motives are transparent, who has nothing to gain from distorting the truth. And from what I can tell, your sources don't meet any of those criteria. George was visibly frustrated now. You're asking me to reveal my sources, and you know I can't do that. That's journalism 101. We protect our sources. Even when your sources are wrong? Travolta asked pointedly. Even when protecting them means perpetuating lies? At what point does protecting sources become complicity in spreading misinformation? That question seemed to strike a nerve. George sat back slightly, his expression showing that he was genuinely considering the point, even if he didn't want to admit it. But then his professional instincts kicked back in. "I think we're going in circles here," George said, trying to sound authoritative but coming across as evasive. "Let's try to refocus. Your film opens next week. What do you want audiences to know about it?" Travolta shook his head slowly. "No, George, you don't get to do that. You don't get to stir everything up, make accusations, challenge my integrity, and then just pivot to a safe question when things get uncomfortable for you." George looked like he had been slapped. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He was clearly not used to guests refusing to follow his lead, especially not on live television. The control room was in chaos, with producers debating whether to cut to commercial, but the decision was made to let it play out. This was television gold, even if it was uncomfortable. "John, I'm trying to give you an opportunity here," George said, his voice strained. "An opportunity to talk about your work, to promote your film. Isn't that why you came?" "I came here expecting a conversation," Travolta said, his voice steady but intense. "What I got was an interrogation based on faulty information. And now you want me to just smile and play along like nothing happened? Like you didn't just spend the last several minutes trying to paint me as some kind of problem?" George's professionalism was cracking. "I wasn't painting you as anything. I was asking questions based on legitimate reporting." "Legitimate," Travolta said, almost laughing. "There's that word again. George, let me ask you something. When was the last time you questioned your own reporting? When was the last time you considered that maybe, just maybe, you got something wrong?" The question seemed to catch George off guard. He stammered slightly before responding. "We issue corrections when we make errors. We have a process." "That's not what I asked," Travolta pressed. "I asked when you personally questioned whether you got something wrong. Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you're more interested in defending your position than in actually finding the truth." George's face was red now. Whether from anger or embarrassment, it was hard to tell. "I've dedicated my career to finding the truth. I've risked my reputation, my safety, to report on important stories. So don't sit there and question my commitment to truth." "Then prove it," Travolta challenged. "Admit that maybe this story wasn't as solid as you thought. Admit that maybe you should have done more verification before running with it. Show me that you actually care about getting it right, and not just about getting it first." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. The cameras captured every second of it. George looked down at his notes, then back up at Travolta. You could see him wrestling with something internally, pride fighting against the possibility that maybe, just maybe, Travolta had a point. "I stand by our reporting," George finally said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "But I hear your concerns, and we'll look into them further." Travolta shook his head. "That's the best you can do? After everything we just discussed, that's your response? We'll look into it? George, this is someone's career, someone's reputation we're talking about. Mine. And you're treating it like it's some minor detail that might need a follow-up." "What do you want me to say, John?" George asked, his frustration finally boiling over. "Do you want me to admit on live television that we got the story wrong? Is that what this is about? You want me to apologize?" "I want you to care," Travolta said, and his voice was quieter now, more genuine. "I want you to care that your reporting has real consequences for real people. I want you to understand that hiding behind journalism ethics doesn't absolve you of responsibility when you get things wrong. And most of all, I want you to remember that the person sitting across from you isn't just content for your show. I'm a human being." That seemed to land differently. George's expression shifted, some of the defensiveness falling away. For a moment it looked like he might actually engage with what Travolta was saying on a human level, rather than as a journalist protecting his turf. "You're right," George said quietly, and everyone in the studio seemed to lean in. "You're right that there are real consequences. And maybe we could have done more to get your side before the story ran. But John, you have to understand the pressure we're under. Every outlet is competing for the same stories, the same scoops. If we don't run something, someone else will." "So you sacrifice accuracy for speed?" Travolta asked. "You sacrifice fairness because you're afraid of being scooped?" "George, that's exactly the problem I'm talking about. That's how we ended up here, with me on your show defending myself against allegations that never should have been reported in the first place." George rubbed his face, a gesture of exhaustion and frustration. "This business has changed. Everything moves faster now. Social media, 24-hour news cycles, everyone with a phone is a reporter. We're trying to maintain standards in an environment that doesn't reward standards." "Then be better," Travolta said simply. "Be the standard. You have the platform, you have the reputation, you have the resources. Use them to actually do the kind of journalism you claim to believe in. Don't just complain about how hard it is and then contribute to the problem." There was another pause, and this time it felt different. It felt like maybe something had shifted, like the conversation had moved from confrontation to something more substantive. George looked at Travolta with what might have been respect, or at least recognition. "I appreciate you being direct with me," George said finally, "even if it was uncomfortable, even if it made for awkward television. You're right that we need to do better. I need to do better." Travolta nodded slowly. "That's all I'm asking for, George. Accountability. Not perfection, just accountability. The willingness to admit when you get it wrong and to try to do better next time." George managed a small, tired smile. "Well, this certainly wasn't the interview I planned." "Me neither," Travolta said, and there was the hint of a smile on his face too. "But maybe it was the interview we needed to have." The tension in the studio had shifted. It wasn't gone completely, but it had transformed into something else. The crew members looked relieved. The audience seemed to let out a collective breath they had been holding. This had been intense, raw, and completely unscripted in a way that morning television rarely is. George looked at the camera, then back at Travolta. "Your film opens next week. Tell us about it." This time, Travolta didn't fight the transition. "It's a story about redemption, about second chances, about people who have been written off finding a way back. It's something I connected with deeply, for obvious reasons. We made something I'm really proud of, and I hope people give it a chance." "I'm sure they will," George said, and he sounded genuine. "John Travolta, thank you for being here, and thank you for keeping it real." "Thank you for listening," Travolta said. "Eventually." There was a moment where they both smiled, acknowledging the absurdity and intensity of what had just happened. Then the show cut to commercial, and the studio erupted in conversation. What had just happened would be analyzed, debated, and discussed for days to come. Some would say Travolta was out of line. Others would praise him for standing up to media practices they saw as unfair. Some would defend George's approach. Others would criticize him for his handling of the interview. But one thing was certain. This was an interview that nobody would forget. It was raw, honest, and uncomfortable in the best and worst ways. It showed two people, both at the top of their respective fields, clashing over fundamental questions about truth, responsibility, and the relationship between celebrities and the media that covers them. And for better or worse, it had all happened live, in front of millions of viewers who had tuned in expecting a simple morning show interview, and got something entirely different. So what do you think about all this? Should celebrities push back harder against media narratives, or do they have a responsibility to just answer the questions and move on? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe because we'll be breaking down more moments like this. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when things go completely off the rails in Hollywood.